Nothing exploded. No threats were sent. No rival claimed victory. Yet by morning, routes that had existed for decades no longer answered to the same authority. Accounts returned empty, not stolen, just erased, as if they had never mattered. Quan Jai-hoon read the reports twice, searching for the violence that should have explained the loss. There was none. No enemy to confront, no betrayal to punish. That was what frightened him. Whoever was doing this wasn't trying to replace him. They weren't asking for fear. They didn't even want to be seen. They were removing power quietly, until it forgot who it belonged to. And in that silence, Jai-hoon realized something dangerous. Someone had learned how to win without ever stepping forward. In South Korea's underworld, power thrived on order. It lived in routines, in inherited names, in systems so stable they no longer questioned themselves. Quan Jai-hoon was raised inside that certainty. His father ruled through structure, not chaos, and by the time Jai-hoon inherited the empire, everything moved according to rules that had never failed. Or so he believed. The losses he faced did not behave like attacks. Contracts dissolved without conflict. Information rerouted itself. People didn't defect. They simply stopped responding, as if their roles had ended elsewhere. When Jai-hoon demanded a name, what surfaced instead was a pattern. The Jade Dragon. No face, no territory, just results. Wherever the dragon moved, authority became irrelevant. Jai-hoon dismissed it at first. Power, he believed, had to announce itself to exist. But as the erosion continued, one truth settled in. This was not a battle for control. It was a redesign of how control worked. And if Jai-hoon failed to adapt, his empire would remain. But it would no longer be his. Hello family, welcome to this channel. Drop your city in the comment section so I can send you special greetings. Now let's go deep into the story. Quan Jai-hoon learned early that power did not need to announce itself. It only needed to be consistent. His mornings followed the same pattern they always had, not because he lacked imagination, but because routine was the backbone of authority. He arrived at the office before the city fully woke, long before the ports became noisy with trucks and schedules. The building that housed his syndicate's headquarters did not look like a fortress. That was intentional. Its plain exterior was part of the design, an agreement with the world that nothing important happened there. Inside, however, everything moved with precision. Men greeted him with small bows, not out of fear but habit. Respect had been normalized here, folded into muscle memory. Jai-hoon nodded in return, his expression neutral, his posture relaxed. He had learned from his father that visible emotion unsettled subordinates. Calm, even in silence, reassured them. His father's portrait hung in the inner office, not as a shrine but as a reminder. The man had ruled for over 30 years without ever raising his voice. Contracts had been honored because breaking them meant exile, not punishment but irrelevance. That was the lesson Jai-hoon inherited. Violence drew attention, structure endured. Jai-hoon sat at his desk and reviewed the daily briefings. Shipping manifests, union updates, port schedules, numbers that behaved exactly as they should. The system was intact. That was always the goal, not growth, not expansion, but continuity. He believed expansion weakened discipline. When his advisors entered, they spoke in measured tones. No one interrupted anyone else. Disagreement was handled privately, never in front of staff. These customs were not written down. They were understood, a language learned through proximity. That morning, one of the advisors hesitated. It was subtle, a fraction of a second before speaking, but Jai-hoon noticed. He always did. "Proceed," Jai-hoon said without looking up. "There's a discrepancy," the advisor replied. "One of the Busan routes did not clear under our authority last night." Jai-hoon lifted his eyes slowly. "Delayed." "No, completed." "Then." "It cleared under a different registry." Jai-hoon considered this a clerical error. That was our first assumption. And now? We confirmed the documentation. It was reassigned legally. No forgery. Jae-hoon leaned back in his chair. He did not react. His father had taught him that control was measured by restraint. How long has the registry been altered? The advisor swallowed. 6 weeks. 6 weeks was not a delay. It was an oversight. Jae-hoon felt irritation rise, not anger but disappointment. Systems were meant to flag deviations immediately. That was the point of hierarchy. Why am I hearing this now? Because the reassignment did not reduce revenue, another advisor said carefully. It rerouted it. To whom? There was another pause. That's the issue, the first advisor replied. We can't trace a single beneficiary. The payments were redistributed across shell logistics firms, each one legitimate, each one temporary. Jae-hoon stood and walked toward the window. From this height, the city looked orderly, predictable. He trusted that view more than reports. So no one stole from us, he said. No. No one challenged us. No. And yet, we no longer control that route. Yes. Jae-hoon exhaled slowly. This was not theft. This was redesign. Correct it, he said. We attempted to. The contracts dissolved upon inquiry. Dissolved. They were structured to expire once reviewed. Jae-hoon finally turned. Who approved this? No signature exists. Silence followed, not the comfortable kind. The kind that waited to see who would speak next. Jae-hoon returned to his desk. He felt something unfamiliar, not fear but displacement. His world had rules, clear ones. If someone wanted power, they took it loudly. If someone wanted territory, they announced it. That was how balance was maintained. This was different. This felt like someone adjusting the furniture while he was still in the room. Continue monitoring, he said, quietly. As the advisors left, Jae-hoon remained seated. He glanced once more at his father's portrait. The man's expression was unreadable, as always. Jae-hoon wondered, for the first time, whether the world his father mastered still existed. The losses continued, but they refused to behave like losses. That was what made them difficult to explain. Jae-hoon's analysts brought data, charts, projections. On paper, the syndicate remained profitable. Revenue streams had not collapsed, they had shifted. Some costs had even decreased. The surface told one story, the structure beneath it told another. Warehouses that once required permission now operated under independent logistics firms. Dock supervisors who had answered to Jae-hoon's people now referenced external scheduling systems. No defiance, no confrontation, just quiet compliance with something else. When Jae-hoon asked one supervisor why a delivery bypassed approval, the man looked genuinely confused. Approval, he repeated. This route hasn't required that in months. Months. Jae-hoon returned to headquarters unsettled. He summoned the elders, men who had served under his father, men who believed deeply in retaliation as language. This is weakness, one of them said. Someone is testing you. Then why hide? Jae-hoon asked. Why not announce the challenge? Because they want time. Or because they don't need fear, Jae-hoon replied. The elders exchanged looks. That answer did not satisfy them. Violence will expose the source, another insisted. Pressure reveals loyalty. Jae-hoon shook his head. Pressure breaks systems, it does not reveal architects. That night, he reviewed the reports alone. Each loss shared a pattern: legality, impermanence, invisibility. Whoever was behind this understood regulations better than enforcers. They didn't resist the system. They used it. And then came the name. Not shouted, not warned, just mentioned almost apologetically by a junior analyst who had stayed too long staring at network flows. There's a term, the analyst said, used quietly by outside consultants. Jae-hoon waited. They call it the Jade Dragon. Jae-hoon almost smiled. A myth. Yes, the analyst agreed quickly, but a consistent one. Jae-hoon dismissed him, but the phrase lingered. Dragon, jade, something ancient repurposed, something beautiful and dangerous without spectacle. For the first time, Jae-hoon felt that retaliation might miss its target entirely. Because this enemy was not standing across from him. It was standing inside the system itself. Nia Asant did not like offices. They created the illusion of permanence, and permanence attracted attention. Her workspace changed weekly. Sometimes it was a borrowed apartment overlooking a river. Other times, a rented floor in a co-working building where no one asked questions. The location mattered less than the distance it provided. She sat with her laptop open, monitoring flows rather than profits. Her network did not function like an empire. There were no layers to climb, no throne to protect. Information moved laterally, dissolving hierarchy by design. A notification appeared. Another route completed its transition. She closed her eyes briefly, not in relief but calculation. Power, she believed, failed because it demanded recognition. Her strategy was simpler: never be indispensable, never be visible long enough to become symbolic. Her people did not know her full name. That was intentional. They knew outcomes, not origins. Still, she felt the pressure building. Whenever systems changed quietly, someone eventually noticed. Someone always did. She checked the reports. Kwon Jae-hoon had begun asking the right questions. That did not frighten her. What unsettled her was the thought that understanding might arrive before adaptation. And when that happened, choices would have to be made. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The Jade Dragon was never meant to be a legend. It was meant to be a transition. Kwon Jae-hoon had always believed that hesitation was weakness. Now, he wasn't so sure. The elders sat across from him in the inner conference room, their faces familiar, their patience thinning. These were men who had watched empires rise and collapse through force. To them, silence was not strategy, it was surrender. "You are allowing this to continue," one of them said, carefully choosing his words. "Loss without response teaches others how to take." Jae-hoon folded his hands. "Loss without visibility teaches nothing," he replied. "I will not strike a shadow." "A shadow still blocks the light," another elder countered. "And your refusal to act is becoming visible." That was the danger Jae-hoon could no longer ignore. Not the erosion of territory, but the erosion of confidence. His leadership had always relied on certainty, his own and that of the people beneath him. But certainty required a shared understanding of threat, and here there was none. When the meeting ended, Jae-hoon remained behind, staring at the polished surface of the table. His reflection looked unchanged. Calm, controlled, but beneath it, doubt had begun to root itself. He reviewed older records that evening, documents from his father's era. The handwriting, the seals, the directness of it all. Back then, power moved from hand to hand. It was visible, negotiable, killable. This new architecture defied those instincts. Jae-hoon realized something uncomfortable. Everything he had mastered depended on a world that assumed conflict would announce itself. His discipline, his restraint, his refusal to escalate, all of it made sense only if the enemy played the same game. But what if the game had changed? At the ports, supervisors followed new compliance frameworks that technically outranked Jae-hoon's influence. At the unions, contracts had been reclassified under international arbitration clauses that nullified local enforcement. Nothing illegal, nothing aggressive. Perfectly insulated. The elders interpreted this as disrespect. Jae-hoon recognized it as displacement. That night, alone in his office, Jae-hoon allowed himself a rare moment of honesty. He wasn't losing because he was weak. He was losing because he was predictable. Legacy, he realized, was not protection. It was exposure. Nia Asant had never wanted to lead anything. Leadership attracted mythology, and mythology demanded sacrifice. Her network was designed to outlive her. Every process automated, every contact compartmentalized. If she disappeared tomorrow, the system would not mourn, it would adapt. That was the point. She reviewed updates from her inner circle, though she disliked that phrase. They were collaborators, not followers, engineers, analysts. logistics specialists who preferred anonymity to loyalty. They trusted her because she never asked them to believe in her. Only the work. Yet even distance had limits. Jae-hoon's inquiries had shifted from reactive to analytical. His people were no longer asking who was responsible, but how. That worried her more than retaliation ever could. She respected Jae-hoon, though she had never met him, not because of his power, but because he had not rushed to destroy what he did not understand. That restraint made him dangerous. Nia stared at the city below her temporary workspace. Seoul glowed with routine. People trusted systems without seeing who shaped them. That trust was fragile. She checked her private ledger, something she kept only for herself. It tracked not profit, but exposure. How close the system was to needing a visible scapegoat. They were approaching that threshold. Her flaw, she knew, was distance. She believed that if she stayed unseen, she could stay untouchable. But invisibility was not immunity. It was postponement. A message arrived from one of her analysts. A new variable had entered the network. External pressure. Coordinated, global. Nia's jaw tightened. This was not Jae-hoon's doing. Someone else was watching both of them. The third force did not introduce itself. It never did. Its presence became apparent through acceleration. Losses on both sides began occurring faster, less cleanly. Routes were hijacked, not redirected. Legal protections were stripped rather than restructured. This was not redesign. This was exploitation. Jae-hoon noticed the shift immediately. For the first time, damage left residue. People complained. Systems failed noisily. The elegance was gone. That confirmed his suspicion. This isn't the same architect, Jae-hoon told his advisors. Someone is feeding on the chaos. Across the city, Nia reached the same conclusion. The third syndicate operated globally, using instability as leverage. Where her system relied on balance, theirs thrived on imbalance. They didn't want control, they wanted dependency. And dependency required collapse. Indirect communication began. Not messages, signals. Shared disruptions avoided. Mutual interference reduced. Jae-hoon and Nia never spoke, yet their systems adjusted around each other with careful restraint. Unspoken cooperation. They were not allies. But they were no longer enemies. The plan formed slowly, not in meetings but in mirrored responses. Each move accounted for the other's logic, each risk measured twice. Someone would have to be seen. The third syndicate required a public endpoint, someone to absorb the attention, the investigations, the collapse. Nia saw the shape of the future before Jae-hoon did. And she understood the cost. The plan did not arrive fully formed. It revealed itself through absence. When Jae-hoon noticed that one of the third syndicate's logistics hubs went dark without explanation, he did not celebrate. He waited. Celebration belonged to people who believed outcomes were permanent. Jae-hoon had learned better. Across the city, Nia noticed the same silence. The hub had not collapsed. It had been disconnected, its permissions revoked, its data access dissolved, its contracts rendered unusable through layered arbitration filings that pointed in too many directions at once. Elegant, surgical. It meant the third syndicate was vulnerable in a way they had not anticipated. They depended on visibility just enough to function. Remove that, and their leverage became weight. But leverage always sought replacement. The retaliation began subtly. Media inquiries surfaced. Regulatory interest sharpened. Investigations asked the wrong questions but circled the right spaces. Someone somewhere was being framed by proximity alone. Jae-hoon reviewed the risk models late into the night. The outcome was clear and unacceptable. If the pressure continued unchecked, it would not destroy the third syndicate. It would destabilize the entire ecosystem. Ports would close. Legitimate businesses would suffer. People with no understanding of the hidden war would pay for it publicly. Power never collapsed in isolation. He realized then what the plan required. Not victory. Containment. and containment required a visible conclusion. Nia reached the same understanding, though she resisted it longer. She traced the exposure pathways again and again, hopping for an alternative, some configuration where accountability diffused itself harmlessly. There was none. Systems demanded a narrative. Investigators demanded a center. The public demanded a name. The Jade Dragon had been designed as a pattern, not a person. But patterns could be collapsed into symbols when pressure mounted. Jae-hoon considered reaching out. For the first time, he wanted to speak to her, not as an adversary, not even as a collaborator, but as someone who shared the burden of foresight. But there was no channel for that. And perhaps that, too, was intentional. Nia Asant made the decision alone. She did not consult her inner circle. She did not ask permission. Leadership, she believed, meant absorbing consequences before they spread. She began the process quietly, redirecting attention with precision. Shell entities were consolidated instead of dispersed. Redundancies were removed. Trails that once dissolved into ambiguity now pointed inward, toward a center that had never officially existed. Toward her, the Jade Dragon ceased being a rumor and became a silhouette. Jae-hoon noticed the shift too late. By the time his analysts flagged the consolidation, the narrative had already begun forming outside his control. Reports spoke of a single architect, a mastermind, a figure whose reach explained the chaos neatly enough to satisfy institutional hunger. "She's exposing herself," one advisor said, astonished. "Why?" Jae-hoon said nothing. He understood why. This was not surrender. It was insulation. Nia was not saving Jae-hoon's empire. She was saving the system itself, the thousands of lives tied to its stability, the businesses that existed in its shadow without ever knowing its shape. She erased herself so the structure could remain invisible. When enforcement arrived at one of her known intermediaries, there was no resistance, no spectacle, only compliance. Her people vanished back into anonymity as designed, their roles already obsolete. The third syndicate collapsed shortly after, not through arrest, but abandonment. Without instability to exploit, they dissolved into irrelevance. The world exhaled. Jae-hoon stood in his office as the news broke, feeling none of the relief he had expected. He reviewed the timelines, the decisions, the inevitability of it all. She had chosen permanence over presence. And no one would ever know the cost. The empire survived. That was the official outcome. Jae-hoon's syndicate retained its ports, its influence, its quiet agreements. On paper, it was stronger than before, leaner, more adaptive, less bound by the assumptions of the past. The elders praised his restraint. They called it wisdom, evolution. Jae-hoon accepted the praise politely, but it felt misplaced. Power had been preserved, yes, but not by him alone. He instituted changes slowly, dismantling some hierarchies, decentralizing others. He allowed flexibility where rigidity once reigned. The system adjusted, as systems always did. Yet something essential was missing. The challenge that had forced growth was gone, not defeated, removed. Nia Asant did not become a legend. Legends required admiration. She became a footnote, an explanation offered briefly, then replaced by newer concerns. The Jade Dragon faded, exactly as intended. Sometimes, late at night, Jae-hoon thought about the kind of world that required someone like her. A world where the greatest act of power was to disappear. He wondered if she had anticipated this feeling, the hollowness that followed survival. Because survival, he learned, was not closure. It was continuation, without resolution. Jae-hoon stood by the window as the city moved below him, unchanged, unaware. His empire endured. His name remained intact. But certainty no longer lived there. And somewhere beyond reach, a system continued functioning without its architect, proving that the most dangerous power of all was the one that never asked to be remembered.